welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so I'm really excited to be here to talk about career ladders and performance management. I was hoping we could get started by having you each introduce yourselves. Alec, how about you?
Hi, thank you, Shannon. Hi, everyone. My name is Ale Paredes. I'm the VP of Engineering at GoClimate. I'm located in New York, so for me, it's already afternoon, and I'm very excited to talk about, team growth, performance management, and to talk with the both of you.
That's awesome. And Chris, do you want to give a brief introduction?
Sure. I'm Chris Haig. I'm going on 1 year at Salesforce in a VP of Eng position, and I spent most of my career working in engineering in much smaller companies.
Thank you. And my name is Shannon Hogan. I'm the Global Head of Solutions Engineering at a company called Carrot. We do the first round of technical interviews for tech companies all over the world. And I've been building software and teams since the 90s. So I know I'm dating myself. I was thinking about this, and performance management and career ladders aren't really something that engineers are usually trained on. And oftentimes we see a lot of variability in our careers. So I don't know who wants to jump in, but maybe when you want to jump in and talk about where do managers even start?
I'll go first.
All right.
I think the answer to that question has to start with the size of your company. If you're privileged to be at one of these like 6-person startups, the market will performance manage you. Getting to your first round of funding is going to be all the performance management you need to worry about. And then with each level of growth, this will become kind of more and more important. And yeah, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, what I would add is, GoClimate is still like a fairly small company. So when we had to introduce an engineering ladder for our team, we didn't, kind of like started from scratch. We took inspiration from other companies out there that had already put thought into having like a good engineering ladder. And we basically do that as a baseline and make it, ourselves apply to our own values. So that saved us, a lot of time, and we were able to, with our few resources, put a process in place.
I love that, and I love tying it to your values. In fact, Chris, I've heard you say before that there's this overlap between hiring and performance management, and there's a process that you use internally for this. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. As you grow an engineering team, you will eventually want to performance manage, but often before that, you have the problem of how to hire, who you want to hire, how to make good, intelligent decisions about who to hire. And so you can, at least in my experience, it's worthwhile to do an exercise where you ask, what are our values? What are the skill sets and frameworks that kind of define us an engineering team? Both, maybe initially to help figuring out who am I going to hire? How are we going to discriminate? Who's right for this team? But that can really become the foundation for some sort of kind of rubric or kind of engineering leveling guide that has a sense of, what do we expect from a new college grad? What do we expect from someone mid-career? What do we expect from someone senior? As unique to our environment, as unique to, are we a monolith? Are we big data science? Are we all of the above, right? And especially when you're small, it's so healthy to do that as a team and as a leader to really try to step back and not talk and let your team come up with this stuff and then put it to use both in hiring and in eventually in having performance conversations both with high performers and potentially with low performers.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I noticed throughout my career is that structured rubric for performance measurement is actually, it was non-existent. I really didn't understand the expectations. And then even if there was something in place, there wasn't necessarily buy-in across the team. So I love the idea of having folks come together and actually as a team building the rubric, deciding the competencies that are necessary in order to be successful. But it's also checking the performance of your current team. And then I assume that for you, then those performance conversations are a whole lot easier. Right. And Ali, I remember when we were speaking, you talked a bit about one-on-ones and how important that is to kind of continually set expectations and drive performance. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Something that I like to at least, spend some time during my one-on-ones with my direct reports is kind of like talking about career growth. Where do we feel we are right now, and how can we get to a next level? And a lot of that is framed through the lens of our, engineering ladder, kind of like which skills are you like exceeding at, which skills need some improvements, and then discussing concrete steps we're taking, to improve those skills. That could be project involvement, that could be mentoring our engineers, being involved in the interview process. So like finding the opportunities to actually level up those skills.
And I'll add, I think that having your career ladder, having this sense of kind of documented expectations for each level helps with kind of two sets of anti-patterns around high performers and low performers. With high performers, there's a temptation to kind of set and forget. And sometimes like never be critical of them. And for many high performers, if their manager never has any criticism or never any sort of constructive feedback, they'll lose trust. The best of us kind of know we could be getting better. I always say famously, Tiger Woods had a golf coach when he was winning all 5 Masters. And so if you can't think of anything to constructively work with a high performer, it can be helpful to have a leveling glide and say, well, okay, what are the things at this next level that maybe we haven't even provided an opportunity for you to show? Mm-hmm. How could we, how do we show that? So at least you have a little bit of a challenging conversation so you don't lose their trust. And then obviously with low performers, most of us would just rather run away. But
probably the worst thing that you could ever do.
At least those of us who aren't psychopaths. But right, you now can have a framework for saying our expectations are X. Here's some concrete ways where it sort of feels like maybe you're not quite up to that expectation.
Yeah, and I completely agree around that. One of the adages that I speak to people about quite a bit is that if you get to the actual review and a person is surprised, then you're not doing your job as a manager. Mm-hmm. I think that's, especially with low performers, that's extremely important. But again, it's your responsibility for them to be successful. So we need to give them tools to do that. I think you talked a little bit about low performers and some of the challenges there, and high performers, some of the challenges there. Ali, what has been and become the toughest performance management issue these days?
Well, 2020, I think we all know, is a very difficult year. But in general, and I think that approach is something that I always try to do, is I try to have with everyone at the individual level and at the team level, like exciting goals. Of course, we want to stretch ourselves, but at the same time, break those goals into very concrete, small milestones, because we don't want to feel demotivated, like we're not accomplishing, anything. We want to feel like we want to be able to measure the small increments, the small progress what we're making, and be able to celebrate that. So I think that has been really helpful, particularly during this time, to keep us engaged and motivated, while also understanding that maybe we're not going to move as fast as we will do in normal circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris, did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we're in a moment where there are reasons to panic that are societal, political, climatological, epidemiological, I don't know, all the ickles. And it affects all of us in different ways. One thing I feel like I've seen is actually many of us are working harder, and productivity is in some ways up despite the transition to all remote. And I think that's in part because there's something we can control. And I do worry, some companies are making some decisions about the benefits of all remote that may be based on the fact that everyone's terrified and working not 20 hours, but working ridiculous hours. and it may not be sustainable. I don't know. We may be making some decisions based on not the right inputs. But in terms of performance management, I mean, it sort of begs the question: how do you, especially with low performers, like it feels terrifying to let anybody go right now. I don't think that necessarily the right answer is to not do it, but I do think there should be an extra level of compassion.
Yeah, Ali.
I was saying to add on, I do agree with Chris on this idea that like people are working maybe more hours, not necessarily more, but just like spending more time connected to work in Slack or email. But I think as managers, we are in like a position to be able to actually lead our teams and say like, hey, let's take time off. And we should be the ones starting with ourselves and taking time off. And so everyone else feels safe. So yeah.
That's a great feedback. We do these biannual employee surveys, and one of the things that stuck out about the July survey is the huge increase in people saying, I don't know how to disconnect. I'm not having my weekends. And I think you're absolutely right. It is up to us as leaders to really model that. And I've been working with an anti-pattern I've had around, I actually like to do some of my long form reading Sunday morning. And then if it sort of spurns any interesting thinking, I'll shoot off a bunch of emails and Slacks, and I'm really disciplining myself, or using Google's new scheduled send to just be completely absent all weekend long outside of an emergency.
Yeah, I've also heard folks are, leaders in particular, one of our co-founders, he will put, please don't answer me, it's late and I work late, and then I've also heard some feedback where folks are getting up and actually walking around their neighborhood for the amount of time that they would usually be in the car before work and after, just to kind of really set those expectations internally at home. So we're going to start answering questions probably in about 8 or 9 minutes. So I just wanted to encourage the audience to start adding some questions to that Q&A tab. I know we're still seeing some questions from the previous session, but don't worry about that. Just keep adding them and upvoting, and I promise we'll get to them. So I guess and Ali, I'll start with you. What's your advice for managers who don't yet have a strong leveling system?
That's a great question. I mean, I think kind of like reiterating some of what Chris mentioned earlier on, starting with like an engineering ladder that has some values. You want to involve your team on the conversation, right? It's very hard to level up someone when they don't even agree with your leveling system. So you need to have that buy-in, and then kind of like, or at least my approach is to usually introduce these kind of changes slowly. So I will usually use one-on-ones a lot to kind of understand what they are, what are their goals and motivations, and how can we align those two things, instead of just like forcing someone into a new process. And yeah, that would be where I would start.
And Ali, one thing that you've said repeatedly, including in our prep, is this whole notion of break a giant problem down into some sort of concrete. And I do think if you've ever worked at a place that had a very robust, multi-dimensional career ladder with like 7 stages and career ladders for DevOps and software engineering and front end and back end and data science, like it could be like, good God, I need to write a Faulknerian novel to even get this damn thing off the ground. And I think to your kind of point, Ali, right? If you're a small company, just jot down the frameworks and technologies you use. Experience in these or things like them, right? Like at least now you have a place to get started. Another framework that can really help is have maybe 3 3 kind of streams for how you think about performance. One is obviously technological. One is process. Do you understand, at a junior level, do you understand and conform to the norms and processes? And as you get more senior, are you helping to continually improve process? And then one, often classically tech, process, and impact. As a junior, I get my stuff done. I'm not a problem. As I get more senior, I'm impacting the whole team. I'm impacting the entire engineering org. I'm impacting the entire company. Maybe eventually I'm, speaking at conferences and having an impact beyond the corporate walls. But like just having that framework of tech, process, and impact and then leveling as a way to just get started with this, as I say, Faulknerian task can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think
no, go ahead. Sorry.
I think the other part is like being comfortable with like the first time you do this is not gonna be perfect, right? As an organization, so being open about it, so your team can give you feedback and kind of like including that feedback iteratively, like evolving the process as you use it. I think that's the other side that like guarantees success, or at least improves the chances of success.
Absolutely, and having mentorship helps. I mean, I wasn't taught any of this when I first started my career, and I've made so many mistakes along the way. So certainly being able to have resources like yourselves, in your lives can save a lot of pain and suffering for you and the people that are working for you. I actually think we're getting some pretty amazing questions. I think I'll just jump into those if it's okay with you too. Yeah, so Daniel, Gail was asking, how do you handle the split between roles and levels in your engineering career ladder?
Wait, say that again?
He says, yeah, how do you handle the split?
It's right there.
Yeah, right at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I'm understanding the question, the short answer is that you do end up needing multiple career ladders. A career ladder for like a product manager, if you get to the point where you're doing that, and a career ladder for a data scientist, if you believe in data science versus full stack data science. The data science is a very separate discipline. You are going to need to eventually think through multiple of these, at least on the technical side. Maybe the kind of process and impact could be somewhat generic. I'd argue though that, and obviously someone just mentioned managers, certainly the sort of people management career ladder is completely different. I'd argue that you can prioritize. Product managers are leaders. Like it's a role that is inherently a leadership role. If you have a product manager who desperately needs a career ladder and you're a small company, that's probably not a great sign. So you can kind of prioritize. Usually you start with a career ladder for the bulk of your team. And then as you get bigger, it makes sense to layer on, UI, UX and other career ladders.
For sure. Ali, do you have anything you want to add?
Nothing more than that. Exactly. Yeah, I would literally say like, yeah, let's start with like the smallest increment, which would be like, the bulk of your team, and then you start specializing.
Totally. Yeah, and I would also, speak a little bit to management. So product managers are leaders, managers, that's a skill set in itself, but you need, and one thing that I learned is you also need to understand operations as a whole. How does a company operate and so on? And so, I've personally gone in my career, started Hypertech, building tech teams and so on, and ended up in a more operational role just because I had the opportunity to have so many different touch points throughout. I would say if that's the direction you want to go, try and get yourself familiar with the more commercial side of the business, because I think that's, extremely important, especially when you're a product manager. I think product managers are exposed to the commercial side of the business more often. And one of the problems that I've had in management and understanding how to advocate for my team so that they can grow up the ladder and grow their careers was being able to tie what engineers and engineering teams do to business value, which is traditionally done by the product team. But you have to be able to do that, and in my opinion, in a leadership position in engineering as well. This one will be great. Any recommendations on books or resources for engineering career ladder? That's from Ronald Haddad.
Yes.
Well, yeah, definitely. There are a lot of resources. Do you want to start, Chris?
I'll send a link. So if you don't, why don't you start while I dig this link up? I should have had it ready to go.
Yeah, I feel the same way, but there are two resources that I really like. Career Path, a book from Camille Fournier. I think it's great just to give you a high level sense of kind of the career of an engineer. And then some examples, Rent the Runway has a public engineering ladder. I took one from Rent the Runway, and I think I also took inspiration from GitHub. I can send the links to both resources on the chat. I found that really valuable.
I just put a link on the chat side. If you're in Q&A, you'll have to switch over. There's a gentleman named Sam Salache who did a really great first round talk, and then eventually they turned it into kind of a long form article. He calls it the rubric, which has a nicely science fiction sound to it. I think that's required reading for anyone trying to go down this path.
Awesome. Thank you. Rala has another question that was voted up. Rala Haddad asks, how do you ensure that the teams are not relying on their high performers to avoid burning them out? Now, Chris, I know you speak a lot about high performers and low performers in the past, so maybe you want to start from that one.
You know, burnout. So the super simple answer to that is if they are truly a high performer, one of the things they've learned to do is avoid burnout. I know in practice that somewhere on the dimensionality of someone's career, you know, we all probably go through phases where we burn ourselves out and we learn from that. But unfortunately, I'll question the premise of the question. We can't force our high performers, or we can't make our high performers avoid burnout. They have to learn to set their own boundaries and avoid it themselves. I mean, I guess there's maybe a premise in there that somehow we're so pushing them that we are burning them out, but that's an anti-pattern on us. And I mean, and I'd argue if you so rely on your high performers, you need maybe to look at the rest of the team and see if you need maybe an upgrade. Because if they're carrying all the weight, something's out of balance there. But ultimately, learning to set boundaries is a lifelong progress, or like that, a lifelong process. Something that working from home, as someone else was just saying, we don't work at home, we now live at work. In the chat, I love that. That's completely right. Which means that we have to create artificial, but we don't have the boundary of getting on the bus or walking home or driving home. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out how to set our own boundaries to avoid burnout. But ultimately, it's our job, not our manager's job.
Yeah, something that I, especially because my team was small, and that is definitely a risk for us when you have like really senior engineers and then maybe more junior engineers. But part of the engineering ladder, coincidentally, is if you want to grow towards a more senior level, is actively seeking opportunities as an individual contributor to enable others, which means, you know, you maybe are responsible for a big project, but you are not the only one working on it. You are delegating. So I kind of like included in the rubrics that we take into account that ability to delegate and empower the team to, you know, do the work.
I love that, because that's often lost on a lot of folks who come to you. And I know that all of us in this room have had somebody who is like, I'm a high performer, I'm doing all the work, I'm the one up at night fixing all the bugs and so on. Why am I not moving up? Why am I not managing people? Me, I, right? And so Ali, I love this idea that, you know, part of your rubric for growth is empowering and essentially helping lead your other team members towards success. And feeling a sense of responsibility on that. So I know you've both talked about that before, but I don't know that we can stress that enough in this business, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I have a colleague who has a phrasing I love, which is that all problems, challenges, and opportunities are solved through some combination of people, process, tech, and data. Yeah. And often when you have someone who is growing, especially on the tech side, they will over-rotate on tech and data and not contribute enough on people and process. I have a guy on my team who just will go out and solve the gnarliest tech debt problems. And it's wonderful, but he always does it by himself, sometimes over the weekend. And, you know, he gave the opportunity to have the conversation. That's awesome. So great to have you on the team. But if your ambition is to become more, you're going to need to eventually figure out how to solve problems, you know, how to create a process that doesn't create the tech debt, or how to train others to do this, or like, you know, basically become a point of leverage rather than a point of just single-handedly getting good stuff done.
Yeah, and Chris, you talked earlier about we want to avoid speaking to the low performers, you know, because none of us are, you know, a psychopath. But the same thing applies to your high performers. A lot of times there's that fear that if you're something up to this person that may be critical, even if it's for the benefit of the team or the company, that all of a sudden you won't get those amazing features on the weekends. And I've seen folks in their careers that are a little bit further down the road that have yet been held almost accountable for their lack of interpersonal skills, and it doesn't do them any good. Your job as a manager is to enable folks, and it's not enable more work out of them. It's enable them to grow in their careers. The best thing that can happen as a manager is that they outgrow and outperform you. And so I think that kind of fear also exists in the business, and it's really important to start as early as possible having those conversations.
Yeah, I think most of us got to a certain point in our career through provably getting stuff done and enjoying the kind of dopamine checklist of this, and this. But to grow past a certain level, you have to start getting things done through others, even if you're not managing. But at some point you're thinking about team performance, not just your own. And there is still dopamine to be had there, but it is less frequent. And it's more diffuse. You're part of a team achieving something, not just I did that. And I think for many of us, that's really scary. And depending on how addicted you are to your dopamine, it can almost be like a drug addiction. It feels like, I'm not getting my fix every week.
That's right. And if you don't feel, and I guess the only thing I would throw in before the next question is if you're managing and you don't feel deeply that you are in charge of someone else's livelihood, even if you're a team lead and you don't feel that deeply, then you're not ready to manage folks. You're doing a disservice to yourself in the business. So,
I like that. Yeah.
Which is a good segue into how can a manager transition into an executive role?
Ooh.
We have a visitor.
Hi. Wow. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to take it. I mean, I think, I would start the first thing I talked a little bit about earlier, which is understanding the broader spectrum of the business, right? Really getting to know the sales folks, really getting to know the BDR folks, sit down, ask to participate in all of these different groups, even if it's just doing BDR work for an hour or sales work or shadowing sales folks. So speak to your customer success managers, have a close relationship, and keep everything positive. I mean, I would say that the best executives I've ever worked with, yes, they're very interested in the business and driving production, but at the end of the day, they were also really great customer success managers. They were excellent at going out and treating everyone as if they were an external client with that respect and dignity that you usually do. And that I is not, maybe it'll make you an executive one day. I don't know. Maybe you'll start a business, but from my perspective, it doesn't make you a great executive, which I think we should all strive to.
Yeah, I think it also depends on sort of what type of executive you aspire to be in especially a larger company executive engineering role. To my way of thinking, you switch from I'm responsible for a team or a couple teams and making sure that they're high performing to I'm responsible for many teams performing at a high level. And I would argue that your sort of focus shifts from managing to managing managers, from coaching to coaching, right? And so I think of my role as having three main sort of outcomes. One, and most important, is building high-performing teams that get, deliver high value outcomes. The next becomes long-term strategy. Making sure that we're looking quarters and even years down the road at what the company needs and how our teams contribute to that. And then lastly, inevitably in any leadership role, there is, sometimes you need to kind of backstop people. You need to figure out when there's a problem and you need to honor necessity and get in there and really micromanage if necessary, and then honor sufficiency and pull out. But because ultimately you're accountable for some group, and you got to keep an eye on things.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
One more,
I think,
Ali, last parting thought.
I was going to say, this is my first executive role. So for me, like the biggest shift is from realizing that now I'm the person that needs to provide all of the context for everyone on my team to understand the decisions they need to make, because I don't have enough time to be in every meeting, to be aware of everything that's going on. People need to be able to make decisions on their own, and hopefully they are making the right ones. And if they are not, partially it's on me for not sharing all of the context that they need and the information that they need.
Awesome. Well, with that excellent parting thought, thank you both so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it, Chris and Ali, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to listen to us speak. So,
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.